This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien begins the show with a grain market outlook. He explains the current market conditions and how our prices have impacted our exports. A discussion on aphids and tarantulas in Kansas with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth keeps the show moving. Chip Redmond ends the show with a weather update for Kansas. This K-State meteorologist recognizes the recent hot temperatures and isolated moisture, as well as previewing our expected weather. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with the grain market update with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, starting off our conversation, talking about the weather today and the potential impacts it can have for the market as we near finishing.
As we come closer to finishing out the U.S., we're marching towards finishing out the U.S. corn and soybean crops and sorghum crops. Of course, we've taken in the different independent tours. One in particular came out and was very optimistic for U.S. average corn yields and especially for soybean yields. So I guess no doubt we're heading for a large crop. Just a matter of, I shouldn't say no doubt. There's never no doubt that something bad would happen, but it'd have to be massive derechos and windstorms, all sorts of things. Right now, there's enough moisture around that, especially in the heart of the Corn Belt, we've got great crops coming, and generally elsewhere looking like we're going to be pretty good. But we have some hot, dry weather forecasts to come in here in the U.S. that may shave the top end off of those yields. And I think that the type of supply-demand balance sheets that the market and USDA is putting together, they're built on the presumption of large supplies, low prices, encouraging usage, and with that at least moderately good usage, okay ending stocks. 2.1 billion bushels of corn, actually 560 plus million bushels of soybeans projected. So if we come in and if the low prices that have come in so far end up in support usage, ethanol doing pretty good, even some exports starting to move now, livestock feed usage not hurt by low prices. And if we shave, let's say 100 or 200 million off of corn and some amount, 50, 100, 150 million off of soybeans, then we're moderating somewhat the amount of ending stocks that we'll ultimately think we have. And of course, that aims us towards, we're talking here today on Friday the 30th. And literally in the fields on Sunday, the USDA will be out in the field starting to measure what the crop looks like. So if the dry weather is still to come in starting this week, but heading off to the first couple weeks of September, we are likely to not see the impact of any shaving of those record high yield expectations that the USDA came out with on August 12th till we get past the September report off into October. So I know anybody that has listened to us discuss these issues would say, well, those folks, they keep saying that all this is eventually coming, but that's sort of the way the year is working out. So I think the September 12th report, they'll show what's happening on September 1st. And then after that, the next go around for the fall harvested crops will be what they measure and see on October 1. And by then we'll have started harvest in many areas, and we'll see where all that goes. So I realize that those farmers that have held corn and sorghum and other crops this long hoping for a rally, that'd be a source of consternation that finally we get something happening in the market and maybe they've already moved the crop. But that's just the type of large crop expectation year that we're in. And I guess I'd say it's been a challenge to see many things positive in terms of the traditional storing of grain type of strategy that we have used year in and year out here in Kansas.
Dan, looking at the grain market, what are we seeing for futures?
We saw on Thursday, the 29th, that against September closed at 371 3/4. It was actually, after such a run of being down for corn, it was actually up 6 cents, just sort of a breath of fresh air given where things are at. Dees corn still at 396, still below 4. So that's really what we're kind of hovering around right now until we have better information. And then you sure do see carry in the market. And we've talked about that last week from the September to the December contract. Just a little over 8 cents a bushel per month, and then 6 cents from Dees through the March contract, March to May, 5 cents, and then it falls off. For soybeans, we saw the markets go up 15 cents yesterday. Of course, there's production issues, but there's also some really strong exports that we can talk about too that are coming into play now. But September, 973 3/4 yesterday. In November, 992 and a half. So up 9 cents carry. Then from November to January, a little over 8 cents. From January to March, over 7 cents. March to May, almost 7 cents again, and then 5 cents the next rollover from May to July. So the market is still, even with some of the little bit better news we've seen of late, still giving every signal to store these crops and off down into some time in the future. And wheat even showed some positive in all of this. Saw the September contract for hard red winter wheat yesterday closed at 545 and a half. Dees at 560, so carry of 5 cents. Of course, we in our part of the world, we've harvested that crop 2-3 months ago, but for anybody still holding it, you've got 5 cent carry from September to Dees, 4 1/4 Dees to March, and from there on. Yeah, the challenge is the amount of the cost of storage and maybe on-farm storage. You're probably covering that, but anybody in commercial storage, 5-6 cents a bushel per month is hoping for something far better than that.
What are we seeing on the cash side of things?
In Garden City area, corn market, 65 over. The next strongest market in that is just to the north, up in northwest Kansas, 29 over for spot corn market at 401, 437 in Garden City. And then Hutchinson also at 401, 29 over. And then other places, 382 for Salina, 366 Topeka, lesser basis levels. So cash markets overall not changing a lot. It is interesting with recent purchase in grain sorghum that you've seen a little bit more of a positive bump in basis. See the Salina basis at 16 over, 388 cash for sorghum, at 14 over in Hutchinson. And so, you're going right up the central Kansas corridor where we have a good amount of rail traffic. And so we have that happening at the same time that we've got a major purchase of grain sorghum coming from China coming into place. So those elevators perhaps are involved in that. And if grain sorghum is going to come out of the United States, it's coming out of either Kansas or Texas or Oklahoma in large quantities. I wouldn't be surprised that our folks are involved in that. Soybean bid still struggling. Strongest one, 975, one over in there in Hutchinson. But everything else lesser than that, 968 in Topeka, 948 Salina, 966 in Columbus, and weakest out in northwest Kansas at 894, just under 9. And the wheat bids, best bid, 555, 9 over the September contract there in Hutchinson, but most other areas weaker than that. Next highest, Salina, at 5 under at 540, and then you go from there. So really the bids we're looking at right now are out into next year for July of 2025, and those are uniformly running 35 to 40 under. Some places weaker than that. So the new crop bids are important because we're trying to gauge what our plantings will be, our seedings will be here in late September, early October, and on into October for hard red winter wheat. So those are generally lower than our full economic cost of production, but they're covering direct costs. So we'll see what farmers do.
And Dan, you've mentioned exports a few times. So how are our current prices playing into that?
Lower prices have made us more competitive in world export markets. And here within the last report that came out as of August 22nd, we're sitting basically with about 370 million bushels sold ahead of this 2.3 billion that we've got that the USDA is projecting for next year. So we're just entering into that. That's for corn, just beginning into that marketing year, and already 16% ahead sold. For grain sorghum, a little less than that, 5.6%. But we've just had a large sale to China that's not recorded in there yet. That just happened in the last few days. You look at the wheat market. And we frankly, the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've been running ahead of schedule on wheat exports. And projected for the week ending August 22nd, 21 million bushels. We need a pace of about 16 with USDA's projection. This is an area we just haven't been in wheat of late. We actually have pretty good wheat exports. Had a pretty strong week of hard red exports, just over 5 million bushels. Need about 4.8 meets USDA's projection, so that's good. Really strong week of hard red spring. And then finish up with a discussion of soybeans. We're about 20% of the way bought ahead on our way to next year's 1.85 billion bushels. And we read reports where now our prices have gotten low enough for corn and for soybeans that we're competitive with South American prices, it's a place we haven't been of late. And China sure plays a major role in that. Is China going aggressively towards South America for geopolitical preferences or not? All in play, but you've seen that happen, and have seen often the co-products for soybeans, some movement that's helped to move, in soybean oil at times of late here, soybean meal, but mainly soybean oil, all coming into play and helping to make soybeans stronger. I guess I finished up. Last thing I'd say is that it's a time of year where we're looking to fine-tune what are probably going to be large crops. We may be taking some of those numbers a little bit lower, and that might add some support here. But we still have this overall large crop scenario, and prices have gone low enough in our the general narrative of, large crops, low prices, that usage is being helped, and it's even getting to the place where internationally, along with the biofuels, that we're seeing usage hold up, and that's probably in the longer run going to be our issue that upholds us in terms of having our markets maintain stability and still give us profitability going on down the way. We can produce lots and lots of grain without question. It's just that, it's really important to have the usage side hold up and not give us overburdening ending stocks.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth with questions he's been hearing. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. Anytime.
Jeff, you've been hearing quite a few questions about sugarcane and sorghum aphids.
Yes. Every year, it's that time of year again. Every year we get questions about, I should rephrase that. Every year since 2013, 2014, we get questions about, now we're calling them sorghum aphids. We used to call them white sorghum aphids, white sugarcane aphids, sugarcane aphids. Now they're sorghum aphids or sugarcane aphids. It's a common name, so whichever you have in your field, it's the same species. They're kind of a yellowish white color with black legs and black cornicles. The cornicles are the two stovepipes coming out of the end of the abdomen of the aphid. And they just started coming into the state late 2013, 2014, so they're really an invasive species. In 2015, 2016, they were really bad. We really didn't know much about them. They caught a lot of sorghum producers by surprise, and not a happy surprise. But eventually, we have kind of learned how to deal with them, or at least the populations have not been as noticeable as they were in the 2015, 16, 17 in that area. However, they keep migrating in every year, starting at about early July. I generally consider about the boot stage when they start coming in, and they will continue to migrate in up until, depending upon the weather, up until late October. So you need to be aware of that. The reason was because if they continue to migrate in, they still have the ability to colonize and cause some problems in sorghum. There are 4 different kinds of aphids that are commonly found in the sorghum in Kansas. The greenbug, that's the one that historically has been a problem in sorghum, wheat. Sometimes it'll be in corn. The yellow sugarcane aphid, which, like I said, now the sugarcane aphid is just the one that's kind of taken over from all of these aphids. I don't know why. I get that question all the time. Why don't we see green bugs anymore? we still see green bugs. We still have green bugs in sorghum. We still have green bugs in wheat. They just don't ever seem to build up like they did. Back when I was in graduate school and before that, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, green bugs really caused problems. The aerial applicators were really happy every year when the green bugs came out because they could make a year's salary spraying green bugs in wheat and sorghum, and they used to be a really problem, but they're not now. We do have resistant varieties, and I think that's kind of what's happened with the sugarcane aphid. The sugarcane aphid started out, like I said, in 2014, 15, 16, at least in Kansas. But since then, I think we have learned how important beneficials are to controlling aphid populations, especially sugarcane aphid populations in sorghum. The lady beetles, the green lacewings, the parasitoids or little parasitic wasps that can do a number on aphids, they really help a lot. And so I think we've used maybe to lessen the amount of general insecticides that we use in sorghum, because the general insecticides decimate the beneficials. They will kill the sugarcane aphids also, but the sugarcane aphid populations are generally on the undersides of the leaves where the insecticide just doesn't get to them. Or if it does kill them and it kills the beneficials, these aphids are going to build up much faster than the beneficials for two reasons. Number one, they reproduce parthenogenically, which means they don't have to waste time looking for a male. They don't have to waste time for eggs to hatch. They're all females. They produce females, and they can start feeding instantly. Plus, they're still migrating in from the south all year long. So those populations, as soon as that insecticide has dissipated, it's no longer toxic, those populations explode, and there's no beneficials around to help control them. Also, we've got some resistance built in some of our hybrids, which I think helps a lot with the populations, whether it's tolerance or, help to withstand higher populations. And also, we've learned to recognize when they're out there. There are some insecticides that are really pretty specific, targeting aphids, which those help also. So if you do have a problem with the aphids, you can use an insecticide that's more specific for an aphid, and it will spare the beneficials. The problem we've run into, and we're running into it right now, is a lot of sorghum around is at the heading stage. If you get an infestation of worms, and we've talked about armyworms, fall armyworms, corn earworms in the past, if you get an infestation of those on the head, they are going to feed on that marketable product. They're feeding right on the grain or the kernel. So you're going to lose 5% per worm per head. It means you need to treat. They're easy to sample for. You need to get out and sample. You need to find them where they're small and treat it when they're small. But if you treat for those, that's going to kill the beneficials. So that's the problem. Do you treat for your headworms, and maybe you have a problem with the sugarcane aphid in another week or two or three? Or just, what do you do in that? You got to treat for the headworms. And whether you have the aphids or not remains to be seen. But in the last 5 or 6 years, we've not had consistent aphid infestations to warrant treating over large areas. Now, every year we have a few colonies established in a lot of different fields around the state, but so far the beneficials have been able to take care of them. So we've not had to do the wide-scale spraying like we did in 15, 16, 17 in those years. So just the word to the wise, the aphids are right now, they're migrating in. We're seeing some pretty good-sized colonies established on sorghum, especially in south central Kansas. They come from the south, so they kind of move north through the state. Right now, the ones that I've seen and heard about are, in south central part of the state still. They will move north over the next week or two, but just be aware they're still out there and they're still infesting.
Something else we're seeing moving in Kansas, and you're receiving questions about tarantulas.
Yes, tarantulas that we have in Kansas, I lived in Oklahoma, and they were called the Oklahoma brown tarantula. And I lived in Texas, and they were called the Texas brown tarantula. And now I live in Kansas, and it's called the Kansas brown tarantula. It's the same species, okay? It's not an invasive species. It's nothing new. They've been here, I'm guessing they're indigenous, or they've been here for a long time anyway. But in the last 4 or 5 days, and it will continue for another week or two, I've been hearing a lot about tarantula migration. These tarantulas we have are migrating. A lot of people have never seen a tarantula in Kansas. They're a great big spider, but they're very secretive, and they live in burrows in the soil. So normally you don't see them. They're not great big web builders like garden spiders. They live in the soil. They'll come out at night. They're nocturnal. They'll come out at night, hunt for food, take it and go back in their burrow and eat it and stay in there, and everybody's happy. They don't come in contact with people. People don't come in contact with them, so they're all happy. But right now, and every year about this same time, late summer, early fall, tarantulas migrate. Now, what that migration is, for the most part, are the males that have reached sexual maturity. And the brown tarantula, again, that's probably 8 to 10 years of age. So when all these tarantulas hit maturity, they're out, take off looking for a female. So they have to migrate different areas, and they can actually migrate in the thousands in some areas. I've seen them where that make the highway just look kind of furry, especially in Stafford and Finney counties a few years ago. But they're migrating to look for a female. The nice thing about tarantulas, they're relatively non-aggressive. Now remember, all spiders are venomous, so they can all bite. They can all deliver a little venom. The brown tarantula that we have, and I've not been bitten one, and I'm probably not going to be, but they have what other people have described as when you get bitten, it's more like a wasp sting or a bee sting. So it's going to hurt, but it's not going to cause you any problems like a brown recluse or a black widow. Now, I have had several brown tarantulas, and when you bother them enough, or when they get mad enough at you, they will rear up and they will show you their fangs, and their fangs are pretty impressive, let me tell you. You don't want to get bitten by them. But they also have the ability to throw these little bristly, hairy kind of barbs, and they can stick in your skin. And I have had that. And it's just kind of irritating, kind of like a little sticker, It doesn't cause any problems, doesn't swell, but it is kind of irritating. So I don't know why you'd want to, but if you're out messing with a brown tarantula, once it rears up, just leave it alone, because it's getting ready to, cast those little sharp bristles, and that, like I said, they're kind of barbed, or they can bite. They don't jump, and they're not real fast, but they can hop a little bit. So they can move faster than sometimes you're expecting. So just when you see them migrating, just realize that's all the males. They're looking for females. They're going to mate. The males will die. Those females then will live probably for another 8 to 10 years. The males live 8 to 10 years. The females live maybe up to 20 or 22 years. So they're a long-lived arachnid. So just realize they've been there for probably, as long as we've been in Kansas, and they're going to continue to be there. Just if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Actually, another neat thing about the brown tarantula, the female's a little more protective of the babies than the general arachnid is. Most insects or spiders, they lay their eggs and they take off, but the female tarantula will, I won't say take care of them, but they're a little more protective of them and keep them in their burrow for a year or two. When they're first hatched from an egg, they're really small. They're really tiny. So that's kind of the story on the brown tarantula migration right now.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show, as always, with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, what have temperatures been like this past week?
It got warm. It got very warm. We had about a 2 to 3 day stretch, depending on where you were, of temperatures exceeding the 95 to 100 degree mark, and for a lot of locations in the state, Sunday was the warmest day of all. We had 104 in Manhattan, 107, 108 in Garden City, and it's a nice reminder that just because we're almost to September and the Labor Day and the unofficial end to summer, that we can still get really warm temperatures. And when we look just at the historic latest warm temperatures of over 100 degrees, we pretty much have another month to go before we're completely out of the woods from the concern of heat. We can see 100 degrees well into late September and even early October for portions of southwest Kansas. And a nice reminder that summer's still here, and we had some moisture in places, so that also meant it was humid in places too, and not necessarily comfortable.
What places really saw some moisture?
So rainfall was definitely more isolated over the last week than it has been previously the last few weeks. We saw west central Kansas. That was the big winners of the week, where they had 2 to 3 inches of rain from thunderstorm activity. It was in a pretty isolated area just there in Greeley and Wichita County. Outside of that, there was more rain that extended a little bit further east and north in the north central Kansas, very scattered. And then in northeast Kansas also saw precipitation, very scattered, isolated areas of 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. But overall, we need moisture still. It's still August. The central Kansas averages around 1 inch of rain. Eastern Kansas about 1 1/4 inch, 1.5 inches. And western Kansas, we're getting down to about a little under 1/2 inch of rain that we average per week. And we need that moisture to keep up. So there were a lot more areas that missed out this week than last. And we look at the drought monitor. That resulted in some mixed changes. We saw drought degradation in north central Kansas, and then we also saw the tributary get improved just because of how much moisture they received. In fact, they got bumped up to the no drought in portions of that. So overall this week, we saw an increase in about 3% of abnormally dry conditions or worse, with basically the moderate drought area staying pretty steady, with those improvements and degradations offsetting each other.
Chip, what can we be expecting as we look forward?
So as we move forward, this precipitation that we received last night into Friday morning, that's moved off. That was along a cold front. That cold front's going to bring in much cooler air and drier air. And we've seen temperatures in the evenings and early mornings are going to start dropping down into the 50s because it's just so dry. That dry air can cool off quickly and efficiently. So much cooler weather, too, when we look at the grand scheme of things through the weekend. Beautiful weekend, so with highs in the 80s. As we go into next week, the conditions look dry overall, and quiet weather seems to be the rule. Might be some scattered showers by the end of next week, but they look pretty isolated. Man, and Kansas itself finds itself in the in-between area where we still have ridge of high pressure off to our west that's dried out, so we don't have that monsoonal moisture anymore. Very warm. And to the east is becoming more active, getting a little bit more precipitation. So we lost our moisture source, and so things will be dry and average to slightly below average temperatures through all of next week and potentially even the week after that into the middle of September.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us once again and give us our weather update.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond. You can check out how the weather could be impacting agriculture in your area by going to the Mesonet website. You can find it by going to Mesonet.ksu.edu. On that website, you can find tools like soil temperature, soil moisture, animal comfort, and evapotranspiration. I will link the Mesonet website in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with you on Tuesday as we will not have a show for you on Monday because of Labor Day.